Whether you're just starting your dairy sheep journey or looking to optimize your year-round production, understanding how seasons affect milking is crucial for success. Let's explore the methods and practices that will keep your flock healthy and productive throughout the year. Hello shepherds, welcome back, and if you're new here, hello. This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name is Megan, and today we're taking a deep dive into seasonal sheep milking practices. Starting off, I'm currently milking a mini flock of Shetland sheep and an East Frisian dairy cross ewe. Historically, I've milked Icelandic crosses, various East Frisian sheep blends, as well as some hair sheep, dairy goats, and even some pygmies and cattle, though it's been a few years. So hopefully I can translate that broad background into some digestible information you can apply in your dairy adventure. First off, let's understand the differences in sheep types and how they'll affect your milking routine. So we have our seasonal breeders and our non-seasonal breeders. I'm working with seasonal breeders, and what that means is that unlike our year-round breeding sheep, our seasonal breeding sheep naturally are triggered by the shorter days or less sunlight for breeding. As autumn arrives and daylight decreases, certain hormones kick in that make them ready to mate. So later on, they'll naturally lamb when the browse is plentiful-ish. So for us, this means lambing is around late winter to spring, and depending on breed, some sheep will naturally produce more milk and have longer and steadier lactation cycles than other sheep. This is the main difference between dairy breeds and meat breeds. Meat breeds put all of their energy into building muscle, where dairy breeds naturally put their heart into milk. A good dairy sheep will produce for around 10 months, and then we have a minimum of a 2-month dry period to help her switch gears to getting physically ready before her next lambing. There are non-seasonal breeders as well as management practices to promote off-season breeding for our seasonal breeders, but that's probably outside the scope for today's video. But if you're interested, let me know in the comments. So let's briefly discuss what to expect overall at first, and then we'll get into the greedy details. So when a sheep gives birth to its lamb for the first few days or so, she'll begin producing colostrum, and then gradually her milk will come in, and depending on breed, she'll be in milk for anywhere between 2 to 3 months to 7 and 10 months, before beginning the process again. Dairy breed sheep will fall on the longer lactation cycle end, whereas some meat breeds will only produce milk long enough to get their lamb off and popping, which is all they need to do. The nutritional requirements are different for different breeds of sheep. So this cyclical period of being in milk is what's called a lactation cycle. So in the beginning of the lactation cycle, right after lambing, the first milk is called colostrum. It's extra rich and packed with antibodies to protect the lamb. Often we give the ewes their shots in the month prior to lambing, so the antibodies carry over through the colostrum, protecting the lambs from some really bad illnesses, such as tetanus. Over the course of a few days to weeks, the milk gradually begins to reach its peak production. This is when the ewe produces its most milk per day, working extra hard to feed her lamb, or extra, in the case of dairy sheep. Then we enter the stage of slow, hopefully, decline. Some breeds kind of fall off the graph fast, whereas with dairy sheep or very milky animals, as the lamb starts eating hay and browse, it's nursing less, and the ewe's body's response by naturally decreasing their milk production. In the last phase, we have our dry period, and this is when the ewe's milk production stops completely. Often they're growing next year's lamb, which grows the most the month or 2 prior to lambing. The ewes that are lambing twins, triplets, or more require better or more nutrition than a ewe lambing a singleton. So this rest period is super important to make sure that ewe has her nutrition on point to handle the demands of the next year. This can give a lot of folks new to lambing some issues or grief. So starting off, we have our lambing time. At this time, I like to worm all the ewes. Oftentimes, with the surge of hormones in the ewe, with the lambing, this signals to the worms that it's time for them to wake up. And so worming the ewes at this time nips a bit of that worm's life cycle in the bud. And quickly, some folks like to let the sheep be for the first month or 2 prior to milking, but I found that it's really important for the health of the ewe, lamb, and long-term milk supply to milk the ewe from day 1. Often, there's a waxy plug that may be hard for the lamb to nurse off, so being there during lambing and ensuring the colostrum is flowing readily not only helps the lamb, but the ewe too. During this time, the ewes more often than not produce extra colostrum, especially the dairy ewes. So it really helps the udder health to milk that out. The ewe does produce more than the lamb can possibly eat, and so twice a day in the lamb jug or maternity ward, I milk out the colostrum and freeze it for emergencies. And just like with our milking routine later on, I'm washing their udder with warm soapy water, checking for congestion, and hand milking each ewe while the lamb is watching. It's a good bonding experience for the lamb and the ewe. During this time, if it's a single lamb, I like to make sure they're nursing both sides of the udder fully. Oftentimes, a lamb will lock in on their favorite side and never switch. This can cause problems should something unfortunate occur to the ewe or lamb. Also, this does impact the life and productivity of the ewe's milk supply. So really the first 2 weeks, I'm milking out, the lamb is with the ewe, sometimes even nursing while I'm milking too. And that helps me observe the lamb, monitor its behavior, and each lamb has their own temperament, so this is something to keep in mind, as it's always a fluid situation. So let's get into the seasons. Spring is when your lambs are growing rapidly and your ewes are at peak milk production. During this season, the overarching theme is consistent milking routines. There's a lot of variety when it comes to routines, so pick one and stick through it. Let's get into it. Some farms leave their ewes to nurse their lambs up until 2 months old, and then they start to separate the lambs from the ewes and begin milking them. Others milk share, which is when the lamb starts at a couple weeks old to a couple months old, and they're separated for a few hours a day, either overnight or during the work hours, and then the ewe is milked prior to putting the lamb and ewes back together. Oftentimes, this is what's called once-a-day milking, and it's a great way to get milk but also reduce the stress of what if, or it reduces the stress from the anchoring effect that often occurs when milking livestock. But also the lambs are still really well fed and cared for by their ewe. I've done this with first-time fresheners often, but with our older girls, they produce enough to need to be milked twice a day, even with milk sharing. Often, especially at the beginning when the lambs are newborn and young, the lambs eat their fill before the udders are completely emptied out. Dairy sheep in particular produce enough milk to feed several lambs. So once the lambs have grown enough to understand which ewe is their mom, so about a couple days to a week old, I found it's just easier to let everyone in the milking parlor at the same time, lambs included, and it helps get the lambs accustomed to the business, the sights, the sounds, and I get to see their temperament. Some lambs are eager to copy their ewe moms, whereas others would rather hang back. An industry standard is to milk at the same time every day, irregardless of weather, irregardless if you're feeling well or not. So say 7 a.m. and then 7 p.m. Or for once a day, just 7 p.m. The time is irrespective though, it's more about sticking to the same time for yourself. So if you feel more comfortable milking at 5 p.m., that's perfectly fine. Just keep with the same routine for yourself. More often than not, the sheep will keep you accountable. My ewes like to bellow at the house, and as milking time approaches, sometimes I'm amazed at their sense of time throughout the seasons. So usually they're there waiting already and hollering at me. I do select for temperament. First-time fresheners are still notorious though for kicking. But getting your sheep accustomed to what the process is as lambs and maintaining that routine really helps the ewes adjust and lock in, which really helps in making the milking routine functional and happy for everyone. Also, I found that most people prefer meat sheep than dairy sheep here, at least. So if a ewe doesn't have a milking temperament, there are plenty of options and alternatives. Also, if you milked other species, you may be surprised at how gnarly sheep udders are in comparison. Their teeth are often small and for some impossible to milk by hand. Not only that, but they're often pointed sideways and rear udder attachment. Does that even exist? I'm joking though. But yeah, the conformation is lacking, so if you've ever milked cattle or goats, the differences are pretty dramatic. The parts are all the same, but the size and placement are very different. Keeping your ewe's udder in prime health is key for a great milking season. I milk by hand, so making sure my hands are washed. Each udder is washed with warm soapy water, and then I dry it off and begin milking. Often there's still snow on the ground, so I imagine that all the warm water and the washing really helps with milk letdown. And after a couple minutes, once the ewe is milked out, I use an iodine teat dip to prevent mastitis. And as an added preventative, I do give our ewes snacks. This isn't just a fun treat, but as the ewes are standing around eating, it gives their body time to dry off and for their orifices to close up. I've seen studies mainly aimed for machine milking and prevention practices to ensure udder health, and one of the methods is making sure they don't lie down immediately and getting dirt in or on their teat. And I find the best way to do that is through a fun treat game, which the ewes not only enjoy, but kind of expect nowadays. And we can't disappoint the sheep, can we? Then bringing in our milk to the house, I strain or filter our milk and immediately chill it, so they keep our milk fresh and clean tasting. It helps to make sure all our milking gear are regularly sterilized and sanitized, our filters are cleaned in and out. I like to use only glass or stainless steel for all parts of the milk handling, just because I can ensure that our milk will be clean, because I can sanitize the glass and metal easier and regularly. If you find your milk tasting off, there's several reasons. The flavors aren't just random. There are various bacteria that make different flavors, just like in cheese making. There are yummy bacteria and disgusting bacteria. Technically 3 types, or classes I guess, of bacteria. The yummy bacteria, like the ones you find in yogurt. There's spoilage bacteria that cause the off flavors and smells and such. And then we have our pathogenic bacteria that'll make you very ill. So if you're tasting animal or barney, it helps to review your milk handling process. So during this time, I'm usually using up my milk by making cheese every couple of days and butter once a week. We do drink our milk, and I find that over the years, that the sheep's milk just doesn't pick up flavors in their diet like my dairy goats would. So the goats and sheep could eat the same wild garlic or even excess squash, and our goat milk would carry over those stronger flavors, which I loved in the cheese. But for drinking, especially in making hot chocolates each evening, I just didn't like garlicky or squash flavored drinks. So that's one of the perks of sheep milk that I personally love. The sheep milk just doesn't require as much work involved in the field to make sure every strong flavored plant is avoided. So it's a positive for me. And so what balances out for you on negatives versus positives can change based on species, but even individual animal or final product or final use of milk. So that's just something to think of when determining needs for your dairy operation. So let's continue moving on through our seasons. Since during lambing is in early spring, we have a bit of snow on the ground. The hay is getting old, and even with free choice minerals, it's not enough. And I want the best nutrition for our girls to be their very best. Not many people know this, but dairy animals, whether it's dairy goats, dairy cows, or dairy sheep, put all their energy in producing milk. Physically, it's high demand, and often grass alone isn't enough to support our milky ewe's condition and production. So I supplement their diet with sheep pellets and alfalfa pellets. Mineral is available year-round, but I found that our milky sheep, they just really need that extra boost to prevent any health complications, such as milk fever or hypocalcemia and other related conditions. Then, when spring pastures really start rolling in, it gives our lambs, who are now ready to start to graze, excellent nutrition. And it gives our ewes a boost, supporting their higher milk production. During this time, I'm monitoring their body condition. It's not uncommon for the milkier ewes to still lose condition during this time. So staying on top of their diet and warm load is important to make sure that the ewes thrive. I'm still milk training with the lambs, and last year I did separate the lambs overnight, and after milking in the morning, let the lambs graze with the ewes. And when the lambs are separated, they're given free choice hay and pellets. Since they are slower eaters, this gives the lambs time to nibble as much as they can eat without the other older sheep hovering everything up. This year though, I was getting more than enough milk for my freezer and that my fridge could handle. So I didn't separate them out, but did creep feed the lambs and then milked twice a day while still getting an average of 1 to 2 cups per milking from the Shetlands and then 1 to 2 quarts plus per milking for my dairy ewe. I know that's a bit of variation, but depending on forage, the older ewes as well tend to produce more up to a point than the first time fresheners. I've noticed the girls produce so much better on some browse more so than others, such as clover or alfalfa, timothy, rather than on some more randomer grasses in a swamp or deep forest. So as different plants start coming in, the milk levels adjust. And on that note, sheep's milk, unlike other milk types, is incredibly freezer stable for up to 6 months. To thaw, I place the blocks of milk in a container in the fridge to naturally thaw. But then after 6 months, it does separate out and it does affect the cheese consistency. But if you want to blend milks from different seasons for cheese making or hold milk over through the dry period, it's super simple and works really well. So easing into summer, the browse is lush, the milk is flowing, everything's great for making hard and soft cheeses, there's bugs everywhere, the lambs are racing, and summer brings its own unique challenges. Heat stress can really drop milk production, so it's important to make sure that there's enough shade for sheep to hide from that harsh sun and have access to lots of fresh water. Even so, you may notice a natural decline in production during the hottest and driest parts of the summer months, in some days more so than others. This is normal and often picks right back up when the temps start to dip. Also, during this time, it's either flooding or we're in a drought. So when it's soppy and wet out, I like to mind the hooves. The sheep are pretty unproblematic, but even so, it's important to keep an eye out for hoof rot, barber pole worm, and other parasites during the flooding periods or wet season if you have one. The ewes are weaning the lambs if they haven't already. So even with milk sharing, the theme for summer is stress management. Heat stress, parasite stress, drought stress. The lambs are typically weaned between 60 to 150 days. So if not already, we're transitioning to hand milking twice a day, and a lot more time is spent on pasture management. Rotating pastures to prevent overgrazing as the end of summer nears, and the sheep are no longer in their peak production, but easing into our late stages of milk. By late summer, if you haven't thought about yet, it's time to start planning the breeding season in the fall and the lambing season for the next year. So the days are getting shorter, there's a briskness to the air, the smell of pumpkin spice is everywhere, or is that urine? Just kidding, sheep don't experience rat like bugs. Though my family says the rams still smell, it's more of a general ambiance, to me at least. And it definitely clings to your clothes. But let's focus on our ewes. So it's fall or autumn, and our sheep, being seasonal breeders, naturally cycle into breeding season due to the increasing darkness. This triggers the sheep's melatonin production, which causes the ewes to come into heat. And though it may seem inconsequential, the ram does affect your milk production for the next year. So this breeding season will really set the tone for the coming year. As fall progresses, our milk production is continuing to decline, and you may be questioning yourself if this is a dip moment or should you just dry off. I like to give it a week minimum of continued milking routine to tell for sure, but usually milk through since it often picks back up. As the total milk amount is going down, our protein and butterfat levels are going up. You may notice your cheese is setting funny. Maybe it takes more rennet to make a hard cheese, or maybe you even experience a TCF, or total cheese failure. This is when cheese making is the trickiest. If you froze your milk from earlier, it really helps to mix up the milks to create a more uniform or flavor of the year type cheese. If you're testing your milk samples, you may even notice a higher SEC count. This is a normal part of the winding down experience of the lactation cycle. The season's winding down and it's time to start shifting gear. I like to stop milking by Thanksgiving, so for the winding down process as we approach that final day, I milk out my ewe for the very last time. One teat dip and a flank scritchy later, I use what's called tomorrow. It's a medicine to prevent mastitis from brewing in the udder during the dry period. It can be hard to get at feed stores sometimes, so I have to order it online. I like to insert it in just a little so it goes into the canal and then massage the medicine in the udder a bit. After this, we do not touch the udder again until spring or lambing season again. Some folks like to flush their ewes to help with the twinning rates, but that only really works if they're not supplemented already. So it doesn't really work for our ewes or our management style. But I do select for twinning though, and ultimately it's more important to feed the ewes to support the twins or more because the fetal lambs grow their most during the last 2 months of pregnancy. So even though I'm not milking, I'm still giving our ewes their alfalfa pellets and sheep pellets. It's high in all the things the ewes need to support the growth of multiple lambs and to produce not only milk for us, but lots of milk for the lamb too. And it's key in preventing nutritional-based accidents like milk fever or ketosis. So sliding into winter, the theme is making sure your dry period or winter season's nutritional management is on point for the needs of your sheep. Since I have heavy milkers, I'm not worried about the ewes being in over-conditioned shape, and I'm not too worried about the lambs getting too large, too lamb. This is more part of the breeding management practices, so it's really important to know your sheep for this part. Winter is very slow-paced. There's no milking and more of the routine of chopping wood and getting on top of sorely neglected woolly projects. As winter draws on, it's important to continue to monitor your ewe's body condition. It can be difficult to feel with the wool, but it helps to squish your fingers in there a bit and feel the round. Does she feel padded or could she use a bit more weight? Regardless of season, routine or consistency is key. Making sure you have a clean milking handling processes from equipment in the barn to the house go a long way in not only keeping your sheep healthy, but making sure that you make the best milky products. Keeping records about the ewe's production, health, and condition will help you find the patterns in your flock and how the seasons and land affect your milk, and later on cheeses. Each season has its own challenges that change from region to region. So in summer in one region, we could have just a severe drought, and in another region, the monsoon season was the worst. Even so, the sheep still need to get milked. And with all these seasonal fluctuations, dairy animals have very specific nutritional needs that also fluctuate with each season. And so hopefully with showing you how we adjust through the seasons living here, I'm hoping that you'll have the keys you need to excel in your home dairy adventure. If you made it this far, an extra special thank you. I appreciate you. And if you enjoy diving into the sheepy side of the dairy world, hit that subscribe button and the bell where we explore a sheep-focused lifestyle every week. Until next time, stay soft, stay fluffy, and most importantly, stay true to you.